Hi, and welcome back to Tech Talk. I'm Ken Mingus, Executive Editor at Computer World. I'm here with Juliette Beauchamp and CSO's Lucian Constantine to talk about Cybersecurity Month and insider threats. If you're watching us, be aware that we're streaming live on YouTube and on the Computer World LinkedIn Live page. So please subscribe to either one of those. You can either subscribe to YouTube, follow the Computer World LinkedIn page. And if you've got questions or comments that we might be able to answer during the show, please stick them in the comments. We'll try to get to them. If we don't, we'll circle back. As always, play nice. We don't want a food fight here. So, Lucian, thanks for being here from an undisclosed Eastern European Bureau location. It's great to see you again.
Good to see you too. Thanks for having me on the show again.
Thanks. So, what we wanted to talk about this month, obviously, it's Cybersecurity Month, and there's a lot of focus on the kinds of threats that companies face and insider threats. There are a variety of kinds of insider threats. We thought you'd be a good one to sort of, maybe give us a few examples of what companies should be looking for or worried about, and maybe some thoughts on how they can maybe avoid problems. So, take it away.
Right. So insider threat is kind of like a big category of threats that only has kept expanding over the past few years. And I think it's good to go through them because people need to understand what insider threats are and how they vary. So you have insider threats as employees who can be disgruntled because they don't like the company for some reason and they decide to sabotage it for uh, just because they want to. Do you have employees who might change jobs? They might have been recruited by a competitor, and when they leave their job, they might intend to take business documents with them, and not necessarily because the competitor asked them to, but because they consider that it would help them in their new job, right? Like
Yeah.
if you are working sales, you might take client lists because you have to keep selling stuff. So uh, and then you have employees who might be bribed by an external actor. Um, there was a case in I remember in Eastern Europe, a few cases in Eastern Europe and in Russia in particular, where ATM technicians working for banks were actually working on the side with criminals and leaving the ATMs, giving them the tools to access ATMs or leaving ATMs open to access, and then getting a cut of the stolen money. There's also employees who might do it for political reasons. Um, and they might be recruited by a nation state and they might do it for their home country. And a recent case, there was a recent report where about an espionage campaign that combined cyber espionage by an APT group and traditional espionage with insiders recruited by China's intelligence agencies into aerospace companies in order to acquire technology so they could produce components for an airplane locally in China by state-owned companies. So you can have that. You can have insiders recruited by nation states. And then you have unwitting employees who click on phishing links, who act on based on emails they receive. Whether that's you have this whole over the past few years, you have this whole business email compromise threat, where attackers either impersonate a company official, the CEO, a CFO, where they actually hack the CEO's email and then send emails to other people in the organization asking them to wire money for a partner or for a supplier and people act on those. So not because because they wanted to harm the company, but just because they weren't properly trained or informed or aware of such threats.
Yeah.
And yeah,
I
go
was
ahead.
just going to say it does strike me that given the number of categories you're looking at here, that a lot of times it's often the unwitting employee who may be the biggest danger because security training really varies from company to company, trying to get people up to speed on some of these very sophisticated phishing attacks. As you mentioned, somebody can break in and can somehow get hold of the CEO, the CIO's email address or their targeted email lists and all kinds of logos and things and craft an email that can allow the hackers to get into the company and start phishing around. And it only takes one employee to sort of click,
Right.
as you say, click on the link, and then
Mm-hmm.
your network is compromised.
Yeah.
Right, and that's probably the most common one, and I would say the hardest one to fix because yes, obviously everyone should do security awareness training, phishing, teach employees how to detect phishing emails with suspicious links and things like that. But it's very hard to change human behavior. And someone who is naturally very helpful will always want to help people. And mistakes happen, and if you have a very large organization with thousands of employees, of hundreds of employees, it's very easy to find one. And it's also the type of attack that it's the easiest to pull off by attackers. So it comes in large quantities. Let's say in a large quantity you have a lot of phishing emails, a lot of malicious emails with links to exploits, with malicious attachments, with all sorts of threats, because it's easy to do for them. So yes, I mean, in order to mitigate this, you mentioned, or to prevent this, you mentioned security awareness training. What other things companies should do is limit, do not use shared credentials that you give to all employees to access resources. Be aware of do an inventory of the information and data you have, and make sure people have access only to the data they need to do their job. So make sure you have access controls, make sure every employee has their own credentials, and that could limit, and don't use administrative accounts on computers. Use limited accounts for employees, and in that way you can limit the damage. No one will say that it will never happen, but if it happens, then you want to limit the impact of that happening, right? I mean,
Right.
what can the attacker do? If they have access to a single employee's credentials and some limited amount of data and some a limited account, they can do very much. If they have access to an admin account and have access to basically open data shares on the network, then they can exfiltrate a lot of data.
They can do a lot of damage that way. I should just break in and remind people, if you're just tuning in, that we're talking about Cybersecurity Month and, of course, insider threats and the different types of threats that companies face, and also what they can do about it. I think, Juliet, you were going to say something?
Yeah, so I have a question for you, Lucian. It seems like a lot of what you're talking about is the ways that companies can mitigate risk with their own employees. But what if you have like a contractor, or you contract out a part of your business to another company? How do you ensure that you're not a victim of insider threats to either that individual or whatever company you're contracting out to?
Right, that's a difficult problem to solve, and we've had cases like that. In the case of the Target data breach, it happened through credentials stolen, remote credentials stolen from a contractor, a subcontractor, or a partner, right? So what you have to do in those cases is obviously choose your partners carefully. You could ask security aware organizations could actually ask for security audits from their partners. Hey, I know how my network looks. I know how my network is secure. I want to make sure your network is secure before I allow your people to connect into my network, or you allow your systems to access my systems, right? It's fair to do. It does make business contracts harder, but it's something companies do. Some companies do. And also make sure if that partner is a remote support, they offer remote support for something and they have remote access credentials into your network, make sure those credentials are unique, they are strong. They are not some shared credentials they use for all their clients, or they can be easily brute forced. Make sure those credentials at least are unique to you, and restrict what those credentials can do to only that particular device or that particular type of devices. If it's ATMs, if it's point of sale systems, if you're a retailer, if it's ATMs, if you're a financial institutions or things like that. Make sure those credentials only have access to those things, and they don't have access to other things on your network.
Yeah, it's interesting. We were talking about this a little bit beforehand, and of course, prime example of a contractor who did cause some serious problems was Edward Snowden. As someone who was able to, obviously had access to a treasure trove of data that he was able to get to, and then basically steal it and take it out.
Right, and that's a bit more complicated because he was an IT he was part of the IT staff, right? So as being part, if you are an IT administrator, if you are an IT part of the IT team or the security team, you obviously, by the nature of your work, you have access to a lot of things. You have administrative credentials. You have, but the question arises: why did no one detect this behavior? Why did no one detect that he was downloading a lot of data? He exfiltrated a lot of data over a long period of time, and no one. This means they didn't have automated systems to detect behavior that was out of place, right? I mean, why is this IT guy accessing data that is only relevant for analysts or for other types of people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's yeah, I mean, Edward Snowden is a good example, and he was also politically motivated, so falls into one type of insider threats,
Got it.
politically motivated employees.
So I wonder, this all sounds a bit sinister, and I'm wondering what companies should be looking at. What kind of behavior should they be looking at, and what are ways that they can prevent, or what sort of what sort of patterns of behavior should companies be looking at to detect and prevent insider threats within their own organizations?
Okay, so you could. There are products out there that analyze employee behavior, and by behavior I mean the way they use their computer, right? If you see access after work hours, if that employee stays late at the office and tries to access different types of data, if that employee comes with requests for access to data they shouldn't actually have access to, if you see obviously see them suddenly downloading a lot of data on their computer when normally they don't, that's a red flag, and that can be flagged automatically. It doesn't have to be. So some things can be done from an IT perspective, and can be detected through the way they suddenly make changes in the way they use their systems and their system and to do their job. Other things must be monitored and detected by the human resources department, like that employee acting strangely, being upset, working after hours, and things like that. Those are things that can be red flags for the human resources department. So it has to be a process that's both common to the IT team and the human resources team, mitigating insider threats. It's not just IT.
You know, it's interesting that as we talk about this, the thing that comes up so often is that a lot of this stuff is just simple common sense. You know, looking for people who, as you say, are accessing or trying to access data they don't need. You know, reminding people that that email that you got from the CEO promising you a bonus if you just click on this link might not be a real email. And of course, you know, obviously, as we talk about these cybersecurity issues, and again, just if you're joining us, we're talking about Cybersecurity Month and insider threats. As we talk about these things, it always seems like with security, it's almost like we're always closing the barn door after the last horse, you know, because you only know what the threat is after it's happened and data is gone, and then you mitigate against that, and then hackers or someone who's going to, you know, who wants to do some damage find some other way around it. But do you get any sense, you know, sort of in a 30,000-foot view, broader sense, that companies are taking these kinds of threats more seriously now, that there are efforts to do like employee training and to monitor networks, and, you know, much more so than, say, even 3, 4, 5 years ago?
Yes, it's become, I mean, the Verizon data breach report that came out this year, I think it was something like over 30% of attacks involved phishing, and around also over 30% of them were the result of some type of insider threat. If we consider also, obviously, if we consider clicking on phishing links as an insider threat thing issue, then yes, obviously it's over 30%. So it's become, and this ratio has increased over the years. So it's a serious problem, and companies are taking it seriously. But there are also many companies where I would say what companies should start with, if they're not prepared yet for this, if they don't do security awareness training, if they don't do these other things, they should start at least with an inventory of their data. Know what data you have and where it is located, on premise, in the cloud, in what shares, and obviously who has access to it. Is it like shared credentials? And you should enforce access controls based on the things employees need to do their job, right? I mean, people who are not in the finance department don't need access to the financial data. People who are not in the sales department don't need access to client lists and sales data and things like that. Those are very important, limiting the access that employees have. And when employees leave the company for whatever reason, revoke those credentials immediately. Don't leave those credentials laying around, because if the employee left the company because he was upset and he's a disgruntled employee, they might be looking for revenge. And there have been cases where that has happened, where employees who got fired connected back to the company's servers and deleted data or did other things.
Got it. We should probably check and see if we've got any questions or comments from people who are watching us now while we're live on the air.
It's actually kind of quiet today,
Good.
so
well,
no
obviously we're giving them all the
questions right
information
now.
and advice
Yeah.
they need. Okay, good. I mean, I think we've really sort of gone through the list here of the types of insider threats that companies face and the ways to mitigate against that. Any final thoughts, Juliet or Lucian, before we let you go?
No, I think this was very interesting. I
It
think it's
is.
anytime I feel like we talk Lucian, I'm learning things that just scare me more.
Well, it is scary. I mean, there's a lot of data. Companies
Yeah.
have a lot of data, financial data, personal data. And, when you've got that amount of data being created constantly, and of course the threat attack, the vectors changing, the chances that something's going to get out, continue to
Yeah.
rise. Lucian, any final thoughts before we let you go?
No, I mean, I would finish off with saying that security is not a business of eliminating threats, but reducing risk. So you will never be able to eliminate threats, whether they're insider threats or external threats or other types of threats. And I'd like to go back to what I was saying earlier. The most important thing is limit the damage that can be done if you are affected by something like this. Limit the damage that can be done by attackers if they get access through an employee or by an employee if they want to go rogue or steal the data when they leave, or delete the data or cause damage.
Great. That's great advice. Okay, well, before we wrap up, I should make a point that we have a Twitter chat coming up this coming Thursday at noon Eastern Time. The hashtag is IDG Tech Talk. That's on cybersecurity, correct?
Gonna
Insider threats.
continue the
So we can
conversation
continue
over
this.
there.
Yeah, exactly. So we can continue the conversation online there. Also coming up next week on Wednesday, we're going to take a look at technology that scares you. Of course, fitting for Halloween, whether it's AI, robots, security insider
insider
threats,
threats.
autonomous driving cars that are going to run you down. So we're going to have a nice conversation about that. And also as a reminder, if you're watching us on YouTube, you can subscribe to the channel. If you're looking at us on the Computer World LinkedIn Live page, you can follow that page for more information on future episodes. In the meantime, Lucian, I want to say thank you for being here. I know it's later in the day there, so thanks for the information. A lot of good advice here.
Sure. Thank you for having me, and anytime.
We'll do this again. Juliet, thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thanks, Lucian.
Thanks, everybody, for
Thanks,
watching.
everyone.
That'll do it.